The knock on the door came at midnight, exactly 5 years to the day since Felicity Foster had received the news that would shatter her world into pieces so small she thought they could never be put back together. She stood in the kitchen of her small apartment, staring at the calendar on the wall where she had circled today's date in red ink, the same way she had done every year on this anniversary. The knock came again, more insistent this time, and she wondered who would be visiting at such an hour. Her hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob, exhaustion from another sleepless night making her movements slow and uncertain. The face on the other side of the door belonged to a ghost. Ethan Edwards stood in the dim hallway light, thinner than she remembered, with a beard covering most of his face and a scar running along his left temple. His dark hair had grown longer, touching his shoulders, and his clothes hung loosely on his frame. But his eyes were the same piercing blue that had looked at her across a crowded conference room 7 years ago and changed everything. The ceramic mug she had been holding slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, sending fragments of white porcelain skittering across the hardwood. She could not breathe, could not move, could not process what her eyes were telling her brain. "Felicity," he said, and his voice broke on her name like waves against rocks. She stumbled backward, her hand reaching for the doorframe to steady herself. This was not possible. This was not real. Ethan Edwards, founder and CEO of Edwards Manufacturing, the man who had revolutionized sustainable building materials and built a fortune worth hundreds of millions, had died 5 years ago in a factory fire in Indonesia. She had seen the reports. She had attended the memorial service. She had mourned him every single day since. "No," she whispered. "You're not real." He took a step forward and she could smell him now, that mixture of cedar and rain that she had tried so desperately to forget. "I'm real. I'm here. I'm so sorry, Felicity. I'm so sorry." Her legs gave out, and he caught her before she hit the ground, his arms wrapping around her waist the way they had 1,000 times before. He was solid and warm and alive, and she could feel his heart beating against her chest as he lowered them both to the floor. She pressed her face into his shoulder and felt the fabric of his jacket, rough and worn, smelling of smoke and salt water and things she could not identify. "How?" The word came out as a sob. "They said you were dead. They said the whole building collapsed. They never found your body, but they said no one could have survived." Ethan held her tighter, his hand cradling the back of her head. I know what they said. I couldn't contact you. I couldn't contact anyone. It wasn't safe." She pulled back enough to look at his face, searching for answers in the lines around his eyes and the hollowness in his cheeks. "What are you talking about? What happened?" He stood slowly, helping her to her feet, and closed the door behind him. The apartment suddenly felt too small with him in it, filled with the presence of a man she had convinced herself she would never see again. He walked to the window and looked out at the city lights, his shoulders tense beneath his jacket. "The fire wasn't an accident," he said quietly. "There were people who wanted me dead. People who would have hurt anyone I cared about to get to me. I had to disappear. I had to make everyone believe I was gone." Felicity wrapped her arms around herself, trying to process his words through the fog of shock and disbelief. "Who? Why?" He turned to face her, and she saw the weight of 5 years in his expression. "I discovered something at the Indonesian facility. Financial irregularities. Money being funneled through shell companies. When I started investigating, I realized it went all the way to the top of my own board of directors. 3 of my most trusted executives were embezzling millions and selling company secrets to competitors. When they realized I knew, they tried to kill me." The room felt like it was tilting. Felicity moved to the couch and sat down heavily, her mind racing. "The fire. They locked me in the building and set it ablaze. I barely made it out. A local worker helped me escape through a service tunnel, but they announced my death before I could even think about what to do next. And then I realized that if they thought I was dead, they would stop looking for me. They would stop looking for anyone who might have evidence against them. So you just stayed dead. Her voice came out sharper than she intended, 5 years of grief and loneliness suddenly transforming into anger. You let me think you were gone. You let me mourn you. Ethan crossed the room in 3 long strides and knelt in front of her, his hands hovering near hers but not touching. I had to protect you. They knew about us, Felicity. They knew you were the person I cared about most in the world. If I had contacted you, if I had given any sign I was alive, they would have come after you to get to me. Tears were streaming down her face now, hot and unstoppable. So where have you been? What have you been doing for 5 years? Building a case, gathering evidence, working with federal investigators who needed time to uncover the full scope of the conspiracy. It spread wider than we initially thought. International fraud, money laundering, connections to organized crime. We needed everything to be airtight before we moved. And now they're in custody. All of them. The arrests happened yesterday. It's over, Felicity. It's finally over and I could come home. I could come back to you. She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the man she had loved superimposed over this stranger with his gaunt face and haunted eyes. You thought I would just be here, waiting, after 5 years. Something flickered across his face, fear or hope or both. I didn't know, I had no right to hope, but I had to try, I had to see you. Felicity stood abruptly, needing distance, needing air. She walked to the kitchen and started picking up pieces of the broken mug, focusing on the simple mechanical task, because it was easier than looking at him. You should know that your company is still running. Your brother Alexander took over as CEO after you died. He's actually done an impressive job. The stock price is up 40%. I know. I've been keeping tabs from a distance. And you should know that there was a memorial scholarship established in your name. It's helped 15 engineering students afford college. I know that too. She set the broken pieces on the counter and turned to face him. And you should know that I never dated anyone else, that I couldn't even think about being with someone when every time I closed my eyes, I saw your face. Ethan stood frozen by the couch, and she saw his hands curl into fists at his sides. Felicity, you have any idea what it's been like? I worked as your executive assistant for 2 years. We spent almost every day together. We fell in love in conference rooms and hotel lobbies and late nights at the office. And then you asked me to marry you, and I said yes, and we were going to start planning the wedding when you got back from Indonesia. I remember. And then you were just gone, erased from the world. And everyone kept telling me I needed to move on, to let go, to accept that you were never coming back. But I couldn't. I kept your picture on my nightstand. I kept the engagement ring you gave me in a box by my bed. I kept waiting for you even though I knew it was crazy. He moved toward her slowly, like she was a wild animal that might bolt. Why? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with 5 years of absence and pain and love that had refused to die. Because I knew, she said simply. Somewhere deep down, in a place I could never explain to anyone, I knew you were still alive. Everyone thought I was delusional. My sister took me to therapy. My friends staged an intervention, but I couldn't shake the feeling that you were out there somewhere. Ethan was close enough now that she could see the tears on his face. I thought about you every single day, every hour. You were the reason I kept going, the reason I didn't give up when everything seemed impossible. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the scar on his temple. What happened here? Beam fell during the fire. I needed stitches, but I couldn't go to a hospital without being identified. A veterinarian in a small village sewed me up. Her hand moved to his beard. And this, disguise at first, then I just never shaved it off. I prefer you clean-shaven. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. I'll shave it tomorrow. They stood there in the kitchen, her hand on his face, his eyes searching hers. The refrigerator hummed in the background. A car horn honked somewhere on the street below. The world kept turning, oblivious to the miracle happening in this small apartment. I don't know if I can just forgive you, she whispered. I don't know if I can just pick up where we left off. I know, I'm not asking you to, I'm just asking for a chance to try. She nodded slowly. Are you hungry? You look like you haven't eaten a decent meal in months. I've been living on instant noodles and gas station sandwiches while hiding in a safe house in Montana. Montana. Long story. She turned to the refrigerator, grateful for something practical to focus on. I have leftover pasta and some bread. I can make you something. You don't have to. I want to. She pulled out containers and started reheating food, aware of him watching her from across the kitchen. The familiar routine of cooking calmed her racing heart, gave her hands something to do. He sat down at the small table by the window, looking around at her apartment as if memorizing every detail. You moved, he said. I couldn't stay in my old place, too many memories. I found this apartment about 2 years ago. It's smaller, but it has good light. I like it. It feels like you. She set a plate of pasta in front of him along with bread and butter. He stared at it for a moment like he had forgotten what real food looked like, then began eating with an intensity that made her chest ache. She poured 2 glasses of water and sat across from him, watching him eat. Tell me what happened, she said. Everything. I need to know. He set down his fork and took a long drink of water. Then he began to talk, and the story that emerged was something out of a thriller novel. The discovery of the financial fraud, the confrontation with his CFO, the realization that the conspiracy went deeper than he had imagined, the trip to Indonesia to investigate the overseas operations, the locked door and the smell of gasoline, the flames spreading faster than seemed natural, the tunnel that saved his life. I hid in a workers' village for 3 weeks, he said. They thought I was just another displaced laborer. I had burns on my arms and smoke damage to my lungs. An old woman took care of me, asked no questions. When I was strong enough to travel, I made my way to Singapore and contacted someone I trusted at the FBI. Who? Marcus Chen. We went to college together. He's a special agent now, specializes in corporate fraud. I told him everything, gave him access to files I had backed up in hidden servers. But he said we needed more. We needed to trace the money, identify all the players, build a case that would hold up in court. Felicity listened as he described the next 5 years, the false identity he lived under, the small towns where he hid, moving every few months. The careful, methodical investigation that slowly uncovered a network of corruption, spanning 3 countries and involving dozens of people. The constant fear of being discovered. The loneliness that threatened to swallow him whole. I wanted to reach out to you so many times, he said, his voice rough. I would stand outside payphone booths for hours, just holding the receiver trying to convince myself it was safe. But Marcus kept saying it wasn't. He said they were watching everyone connected to me. Your phone was tapped. Your apartment was under surveillance. If I had made contact, I would have put you in danger. They were watching me. For the first 2 years, yes. After that, they seemed to decide you really didn't know anything, but we couldn't take chances. She pressed her palms flat against the table. So what now? You're just back. Everything goes back to normal. I don't expect normal. I don't even know what that means anymore, but I had to see you. I had to know if there was any chance you could forgive me. The pasta on his plate was half eaten. forgotten as he looked at her with an expression that broke her heart all over again. She had spent 5 years imagining what she would say if she ever saw him again, but now that he was here, all her rehearsed speeches vanished. "I need time," she said finally. "This is too much to process in one night. I understand. Where are you staying?" "I have a hotel room downtown. The company is putting me up until I can sort out my housing situation. Apparently my apartment was sold after I was declared dead." "What about your assets? Your money, tied up in legal proceedings?" "My death certificate needs to be reversed, which is apparently a bureaucratic nightmare. My lawyer says it could take months. In the meantime, the FBI is providing some financial support since I was working with them." Felicity rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building. "This is insane. This whole situation is completely insane. I know." "You can stay here tonight," she said abruptly. "It's late. You look exhausted." The couch pulls out into a bed. "Felicity, I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering. Despite everything, I'm not going to send you out into the night after you just came back from the dead." He nodded, and she could see the exhaustion settling over him like a physical weight. She pulled sheets and a blanket from the linen closet and helped him convert the couch into a bed. They worked in silence, the domestic task feeling both familiar and strange. "Bathroom is down the hall," she said. "Towels are in the cabinet if you want a shower. I probably have an old shirt that might fit you. Thank you." She found a large T-shirt and sweatpants that she had bought for lazy weekends and handed them to him. He took them and their fingers brushed, sending electricity up her arm. He felt it too, she could tell from the way his breath caught. "Good night, Felicity." "Good night, Ethan." She retreated to her bedroom and closed the door, then stood with her back against it, trying to calm her racing heart. She could hear the shower running in the bathroom. Ethan Edwards was alive. He was alive, and he was in her apartment, and everything she had believed for 5 years had just been turned upside down. She changed into pajamas and climbed into bed, knowing sleep would be impossible. The glowing numbers on her alarm clock marked the minutes passing. She heard the shower turn off, heard footsteps in the hallway, heard the creak of the pull-out bed as he settled in. An hour passed. Then 2. She stared at the ceiling and tried to sort through the tangle of emotions in her chest. Anger that he had let her suffer. Relief that he was alive. Fear of what came next. Love that had never died, pulsing beneath everything else like a second heartbeat. A soft knock on her door made her sit up. "Felicity, are you awake?" She got out of bed and opened the door. He stood in the hallway wearing the clothes she had given him, his hair still damp from the shower, the beard gone. She had been right. She preferred him clean-shaven. Without the facial hair, he looked more like the man she remembered, though still thinner and more worn. "I can't sleep," he said. "I keep thinking this is a dream, that I'll wake up and you'll be gone. I keep thinking the same thing." They stood there in the doorway, neither moving. Then Felicity made a decision. She took his hand and led him to her bed. They lay down facing each other, not touching except for their joined hands between them. "Just for tonight," she whispered. "I just need to know you're real. I'm real. I promise I'm real." She fell asleep to the sound of his breathing, her hand in his, and for the first time in 5 years, she did not dream of death and fire and loss. Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through the curtains. Felicity woke to find Ethan watching her, his blue eyes gentle in the early light. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi, I'm still here. I can see that." They lay there for a few more minutes, neither wanting to move and break the spell. Then reality intruded in the form of Felicity's phone alarm, reminding her that it was a workday and the world continued on despite personal miracles. "I have to go to work," she said, sitting up reluctantly. "Where are you working now?" I'm an operations manager at Foster Logistics. It's my father's company. After you died, I couldn't stay at Edwards Manufacturing. It hurt too much. My dad offered me a position and I took it. Do you like it? It's fine. It's not what I imagined doing with my life, but it pays the bills. She got ready for work while Ethan made coffee in the kitchen. Another small piece of normalcy in an abnormal situation. They sat at the table together, drinking coffee and eating toast, and Felicity was struck by how easily they fell back into old rhythms. "What are you going to do today?" she asked. "I have meetings with lawyers and with Alexander. I need to figure out what happens with the company. He's been CEO for 5 years. He has a right to that position now. I can't just waltz back in and take over." "Are you sure you even want to, after everything that happened?" Ethan considered the question. "I don't know. That company was my life for so long, but the fire changed something in me, made me question what really matters." "What does matter?" He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. You matter. You're the only thing that kept me going." She set down her coffee cup, her hands shaking. "Ethan, I know it's too soon. I know I have no right to say these things, but I need you to know that every decision I made was about protecting you. Every day I stayed away was torture. I believe you." "I do, but I'm scared. I'm scared of letting myself feel everything I felt before and then losing you again. I'm not going anywhere, not ever again." She stood up, needing to move, to think. "I have to go to work. We can talk more tonight, okay?" "Okay." At the door, she paused. "Will you be here when I get back? Do you want me to be?" "Yes." The smile that crossed his face was like sunrise. "Then I'll be here." Work was impossible. Felicity sat through meetings and answered emails and reviewed shipping manifests, but her mind was 1,000 miles away. Her assistant noticed something was off and kept asking if she was feeling well. She claimed a headache, which was not entirely untrue. During her lunch break, she called her best friend Rachel, who had been her rock through the worst of the grief. "He's alive," Felicity said without preamble when Rachel answered, silence on the other end. Then, "What, Ethan? He's alive. He showed up at my apartment last night." "Felicity, what are you talking about?" She explained everything, the words tumbling out in a rush. The fire was not an accident. The conspiracy. The 5 years in hiding. The fact that he had come back. "Oh my God," Rachel breathed. "Oh my God, are you okay?" "I don't know. I don't know what I am." "Where is he now?" "At my apartment. I told him he could stay." "Felicity." "What was I supposed to do?" "He came back from the dead, Rachel. I couldn't just turn him away." I know, it's just a lot." "Are you sure he's telling the truth? About the conspiracy and everything?" "I think so." "Why would he make that up?" "I don't know. I'm just worried about you." "You spent so long mourning him. What if he breaks your heart again?" "Then I'll survive. I survived thinking he was dead. I can survive anything." They talked for another few minutes before Felicity had to return to work. The afternoon dragged on interminably. She kept checking her phone, half expecting a message saying it had all been a dream. But there were no messages. Just the slow tick of the clock and the weight of anticipation building in her chest. When 5 o'clock finally arrived, she practically ran to her car. The drive home took 20 minutes that felt like hours. She parked in her usual spot and took the stairs 2 at a time, her heart pounding. The smell of cooking food greeted her when she opened the door. Ethan was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove, and the sight of him there, so domestic and real, made her eyes sting with tears. "You're cooking," she said. He turned and smiled. "I hope you don't mind. I went to the grocery store and picked up some things. I wanted to make you dinner." "What are you making?" "Chicken piccata. Your favorite." The fact that he remembered made something crack open in her chest. She set down her bag and walked to the kitchen, looking at the meal taking shape. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to. I've had 5 years of awful food. Let me enjoy cooking something good for someone I love." The word love hung in the air between them. He had said it so casually, like it was simply a fact. She supposed it was. "How did your meetings go?" she asked, changing the subject. "Complicated." Alexander was shocked, obviously. "We spent 3 hours talking. He's done an amazing job with the company, Felicity. He's implemented programs I never would have thought of, expanded into new markets. The company is healthier now than when I left it. So what happens? We're going to be co-CEOs for now. While we figure out what makes sense long term, I think I might actually prefer it that way. The company nearly killed me. I'm not sure I want that kind of pressure again." They ate dinner at the small table, and the conversation flowed more easily than it had the night before. He asked about her work, about her family, about the life she had built in his absence. She asked about Montana and Singapore and all the places he had hidden. They were learning each other again, finding the familiar contours underneath the changes. After dinner, they washed dishes together, working in comfortable silence. Felicity handed him a plate to dry and their fingers touched, sending that same electric current through her. "I've missed this," Ethan said quietly. "Just being with you, doing normal things. I've missed it too." He set down the dish towel and turned to face her. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "The engagement ring. You said you kept it. Do you still have it?" Her heart skipped. "Yes." "Can I see it?" She dried her hands and went to her bedroom, returning with a small velvet box. She opened it to reveal the ring he had chosen for her 7 years ago, a simple platinum band with a single diamond. He had picked it out himself, refusing help from jewelers, insisting he knew exactly what she would want. He had been right. Ethan took the box from her, his hands unsteady. "I bought this the week after I realized I was in love with you. I carried it around for 3 months before I finally got the courage to propose. I didn't know that. You were the executive assistant. I was the CEO. I kept thinking it was inappropriate, that I was taking advantage of a power dynamic. But then I realized that what we had was too real to ignore." She remembered the night he had proposed. They had been working late on a contract negotiation, and he had suddenly stood up, walked around the desk, and gotten down on one knee right there in the office. No fancy restaurant, no elaborate setup, just him and her and the truth of what they felt. "I said yes before you even finished asking the question," she said. "I remember. You grabbed my face and kissed me and said yes about 50 times. I was excited." He closed the ring box and set it on the counter, then took both her hands in his. "I can't ask you to marry me again. Not yet. Not until you're ready, but I need you to know that I still want that. I want everything we planned, the wedding, the life together, the future." Felicity looked up at him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. "I want that too, but I need time, Ethan. I need to learn to trust again. To trust that you won't disappear. I'll give you all the time you need. I'll wait forever if that's what it takes." She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "You don't have to wait forever. Just give me time to process, to heal." He lifted one hand to her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "Can I kiss you?" Instead of answering, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, like they were both afraid of breaking something fragile. Then it deepened, and 5 years of longing and grief and love poured into it. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her close. Her hands tangled in his hair. They kissed like drowning people gasping for air, like this was the only thing tethering them to the world. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I never stopped, not for a single second. I love you too. Even when I thought you were gone, I loved you." They moved to the couch and sat close together, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her. The television played something neither of them watched. They simply existed in each other's presence, grateful for this second chance. Over the next few weeks, they slowly rebuilt what had been broken. Ethan found an apartment not far from Felicity's, giving them each space while they navigated this new reality. He worked with Alexander to restructure the company and implemented new oversight to prevent future corruption. He gave interviews to business magazines about his miraculous return and used the platform to advocate for stronger corporate governance. Felicity watched him step back into his life with a mixture of pride and concern. He was different now, more careful, more aware of how quickly everything could be taken away. But he was also more present, more focused on what truly mattered. He never worked past 6 anymore. He never missed a dinner date. He called when he said he would and showed up when he promised. They took things slowly, learning each other again. He told her about the nightmares he still had about the fire, and she told him about the panic attacks she had experienced in the first year after his death. They went to therapy together, working through the trauma with a professional who specialized in grief and loss. It was hard work, painful at times, but necessary. 3 months after his return, Ethan took her to the site where his new factory was being built. Edwards Manufacturing was constructing a state-of-the-art facility focused on sustainable materials, and he wanted her to see it. "This is the future," he said as they walked through the construction site, hard hats protecting their heads. "Materials that don't harm the environment. Production processes that minimize waste, fair wages for all workers. Everything I wanted to do before but never quite achieved." "It's impressive," Felicity said, looking at the framework rising from the ground. "I want you to be part of it." She looked at him in surprise. "What?" "Come work with me again. Not as my assistant, as my partner. You have the skills and the mind for this. Your work at your father's company has proven that. I want you by my side, building something that matters." "Ethan, I don't know. Think about it. No pressure, but I mean it, Felicity. I don't want to build a future without you in it." She thought about it for days, weighing the pros and cons. Working with him again would mean blurring personal and professional lines. But it would also mean pursuing work that excited her, that felt meaningful. In the end, the decision was easier than she expected. "I'll do it," she told him over dinner one night. "I'll come work at Edwards Manufacturing, but as your equal, not your subordinate." His face lit up. "As my equal, I promise." She gave her notice at Foster Logistics, and her father surprised her by being supportive. "I could see you weren't happy here," he said. "Go build something with the man you love. Life's too short for anything else." Starting work at the company was strange at first. People whispered when she walked by, knowing the history between her and Ethan. But she proved herself quickly, implementing efficient systems and bringing fresh perspectives to old problems. Within a few months, she was running the operations division and loving every minute of it. 6 months after his return, Ethan took her to a small restaurant overlooking the harbor. She had not thought anything of it. They ate out frequently now, trying to make up for lost time. But when dessert arrived, she noticed he seemed nervous, fidgeting with his napkin and barely touching his food. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm perfect. Actually, I'm terrified, but also perfect." "What are you talking about?" He reached across the table and took her hand. "I know I said I would wait, that I would give you time, and I have waited, Felicity. I've tried to be patient. But I can't wait anymore." Her heart started racing. "Ethan." He stood up and moved to her side of the table, then got down on one knee. The entire restaurant seemed to stop and watch. He pulled out the velvet box she recognized, the ring she had kept safe for 5 years. "Felicity Foster, I asked you this question 7 years ago and you said yes. Then I disappeared and put you through hell. I have no right to ask again. But I'm asking anyway, because I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that I will never leave you again? Tears streamed down her face. She could barely see him through the blur. Yes. Yes, of course yes. He slid the ring onto her finger where it had always belonged, and she pulled him up to kiss him as the restaurant erupted in applause. It fit perfectly, like no time had passed at all. They were married 3 months later in a small ceremony with close friends and family. Felicity wore a simple white dress and carried wildflowers. Ethan wore a navy suit and cried when she walked down the aisle. Rachel was the maid of honor, and Alexander was the best man. The ceremony was held in a garden, under a canopy of trees with sunlight filtering through the leaves. When the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union, someone joked, "We already thought he was dead once, let's not jinx it," and everyone laughed through their tears. Ethan's vows were simple and perfect. I lost 5 years with you, but I promise to make up for every single day. I promise to never take a moment for granted. I promise to love you fiercely and completely for all the years we have left. Felicity's vows were equally straightforward. You came back to me when I thought all hope was lost. You proved that love can survive anything, even death. I promise to build a life with you that's worth all the waiting, worth all the pain. I promise to love you today and every day after. They honeymooned in Italy, spending 2 weeks eating good food and exploring small villages, and learning how to simply be together without the weight of trauma hanging over them. They laughed more than Felicity could remember laughing in years. They made love like they were discovering each other for the first time. They talked about the future with hope instead of fear. When they returned, they bought a house together, a craftsman-style home with a big backyard and enough room to grow. They adopted a dog, a golden retriever they named Charlie, who had boundless energy and loved them both equally. They hosted dinner parties for friends and family. They built a life that felt solid and real. A year after the wedding, Felicity discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan over breakfast on a Saturday morning, simply setting the positive test on the table next to his coffee. He stared at it for a full minute, not speaking. Then he looked up at her with wonder in his eyes. "Really? Really?" He stood up so fast his chair fell over, then pulled her into his arms and spun her around the kitchen. "We're having a baby. We're going to be parents. We are." He set her down gently, then immediately looked worried. "Are you okay? Do you feel okay? Should you be standing?" "Do you need to sit down?" She laughed. "I'm fine. I'm pregnant, not broken." He spent the entire pregnancy being hilariously overprotective, constantly worrying about everything from her nutrition to her stress levels. He read every parenting book he could find and attended every doctor's appointment. He painted the nursery himself, a soft yellow that would work for a boy or girl. Their daughter was born on a spring morning, arriving 3 weeks early but healthy and perfect. They named her Emma Rose Edwards, and the first time Ethan held her, Felicity saw tears streaming down his face. "Hello, little one," he whispered to the tiny bundle in his arms. "I'm your dad. I've been waiting to meet you." Emma had Felicity's dark hair and Ethan's blue eyes, and from the moment she entered the world, she had both her parents wrapped around her tiny fingers. Ethan was an incredibly hands-on father, getting up for night feedings and changing diapers and singing off-key lullabies. He worked from home as much as possible, refusing to miss a single milestone. When Emma was 6 months old, Felicity and Ethan sat in the backyard one evening, watching the sunset while their daughter slept in her stroller between them. Charlie lay at their feet, contentedly chewing a toy. "Can you believe this is our life?" Felicity said softly. Ethan reached over and took her hand. Some days I still think I'm going to wake up in that village in Indonesia and realize it was all a dream. It's real. This is all real. I know. And I'm grateful for every second of it." She looked at him, seeing the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago, now tempered by experience and loss and the joy of second chances. "Do you ever regret it? The way things happened?" He considered the question carefully. "I regret the pain it caused you. I regret the 5 years we lost. But everything that happened brought us here, made us who we are, so no, I don't regret it, not if this is where we ended up." Emma stirred in her stroller, making the small sounds that meant she would wake soon. Ethan got up and lifted her gently, cradling her against his chest. "Hey, sweetheart," he murmured. "Did you have a good nap?" She yawned and looked up at him with those startling blue eyes, and Felicity's heart felt so full she thought it might burst. This was everything she had dreamed of during those dark 5 years. The family, the love, the normalcy that had seemed impossible. Over the next few years, their life continued to unfold in beautiful, ordinary ways. Emma grew into a bright, curious toddler who loved books and dogs and anything that sparkled. They had a second child, a son they named Noah Alexander, who had Ethan's serious nature and Felicity's determination. Edwards Manufacturing thrived under the joint leadership of Ethan and Alexander, becoming a model for ethical business practices. Felicity ran the operations division with skill and passion, proving herself to be every bit as capable as Ethan had always known she was. They made sure to maintain work-life balance, never letting the company consume them the way it once had. On the 10th anniversary of Ethan's return, they took the children to visit the site where the factory fire had happened. It had been rebuilt now, transformed into something positive, but they wanted to acknowledge what had occurred there. Emma, now 9, was old enough to understand some of the story. "This is where the bad thing happened to Daddy?" she asked, holding Felicity's hand. "Yes," Ethan said, kneeling to her level. "This is where I almost died, but I survived. And that survival led me back to your mom and eventually to you and your brother. So even though bad things happened here, it's also part of our story." "I'm glad you survived, Daddy," Emma said seriously. "Me too, baby, me too." That night after the children were asleep, Ethan and Felicity sat on their back porch, watching fireflies dance in the warm summer air. She leaned against his shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her. 10 years, she said. "It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago at the same time. I know what you mean. Do you think about it much anymore? That time, less than I used to. The nightmares are rare now. Mostly I just feel grateful." She tilted her head to look up at him. "For what? For everything. For you waiting. For getting a second chance. For this life we built. Not everyone gets to come back from the dead and find that the person they love most still loves them back. I never stopped loving you, not even when I thought you were gone forever." He kissed the top of her head. "I know. And that's the real miracle, isn't it? Not that I survived, but that your love survived." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds around them, crickets chirping, the distant sound of cars on the street, Charlie snoring on his bed inside, the soft breathing of their children sleeping upstairs. This was what they had fought for, what Ethan had survived for, what Felicity had waited for. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but these quiet instances of peace and contentment. The ordinary beauty of a life built together, piece by piece, day by day. Years continued to pass. Emma started middle school, showing aptitude in science and a passion for environmental causes that made both her parents proud. Noah discovered a love for music, filling the house with piano melodies. Ethan and Felicity grew older together, finding silver in their hair and laugh lines around their eyes. The company continued to prosper. They expanded internationally, always maintaining the ethical standards Ethan had nearly died defending. They established foundations to support education and sustainable development. They used their wealth to make a difference, never forgetting how close they had come to losing everything. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Felicity back to the restaurant where he had proposed the second time. They sat at the same table, overlooking the harbor that had changed so much and yet remained fundamentally the same. 20 years, Felicity said, marveling at the passage of time. Plus the 2 years before you disappeared. 22 years since we first fell in love. Best 22 years of my life, Ethan said, raising his glass, even counting the 5 years I spent in hiding. She laughed and clinked her glass against his. I'll drink to that. He reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing over her ring. I want you to know something. Every day I wake up next to you, I'm amazed. Amazed that you're real, that this life is real, that I get to love you. I feel the same way. Do you remember that night I showed up at your door? How terrified I was that you would turn me away. I remember. I also remember thinking I was hallucinating. If you had told me then that we would be here now, married for 20 years with 2 incredible kids and a life that feels like a dream, I'm not sure I would have believed it. Life has a way of surprising us, Felicity said softly. We survived the worst. We deserved the best. They finished their dinner and walked along the harbor, hand in hand like they had done countless times before. The city lights reflected off the water, creating patterns of gold and silver. Other couples passed them, young and old, each caught up in their own stories. I have something for you, Ethan said, stopping near the place where they had taken their wedding photos all those years ago. Ethan, we agreed no gifts. This isn't really a gift, more like a completion. He pulled out a small box, and for a moment Felicity thought he was proposing again. But when she opened it, she found a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm. A phoenix, rising from the ashes, he said as he fastened it around her wrist. That's us. We burned down and we built ourselves back up stronger than before. She touched the charm, feeling the weight of symbolism in the small piece of metal. It's perfect. You're perfect. This life is perfect, and I wanted you to have something to remember that. She kissed him there on the harbor walk, under the stars and city lights, tasting salt air and wine and the sweetness of a love that had conquered death itself. Their children grew into young adults. Emma went to college to study environmental engineering, determined to continue her father's work in sustainable development. Noah received a scholarship to a prestigious music conservatory, his talent taking him further than anyone had expected. Ethan and Felicity found themselves with an empty nest, rediscovering each other in the quiet of their home. They traveled more, visiting the places Ethan had hidden during those 5 lost years. They went to the village in Indonesia where the old woman had saved his life, bringing gifts and gratitude. They explored Singapore and Montana, retracing his steps, turning painful memories into new experiences. One evening in their early 60s, they sat in their backyard as the sun set, much like they had done 1,000 times before. Charlie had passed away years ago, replaced by Charlie Roman II and eventually Charlie Roman III, who now lay at their feet. The garden had matured, trees grown tall and flowers blooming in profusion. You know what I think about sometimes, Felicity said, her head resting on Ethan's shoulder. What's that? That night you knocked on my door. What would have happened if I hadn't been home? Or if I had moved and you couldn't find me? I would have kept looking. I would never have stopped until I found you. How can you be so sure? He turned to face her, his blue eyes still as piercing as they had been decades ago. Because you were my North Star, Felicity. For 5 years in the darkness, you were the light that kept me oriented. I would have searched forever. We're lucky, aren't we, that everything worked out the way it did? We're not just lucky. We fought for this. You waited when no one else would have. I survived when I shouldn't have. We chose each other every day, even when it was hard. That's not luck, that's love. She smiled and kissed him, a gentle press of lips that held decades of affection and intimacy. You're right, it's love, the kind that survives everything. Their grandchildren came along eventually. Emma had twins, and Noah had a daughter. Ethan and Felicity threw themselves into grandparenting with enthusiasm, spoiling the children and filling their home with laughter once again. They told the kids stories about the company and the work they did, planting seeds of curiosity and compassion. As they grew older, they slowed down. Ethan retired from active management of the company, leaving it in Alexander's capable hands and the next generation of leadership. Felicity stepped back from her role, focusing on mentorship and advisory work. They spent more time in their garden, more evenings on the porch, more moments simply being together. On what would have been the 45th anniversary of the day, Ethan had first asked Felicity to marry him. He woke to find her watching him in the early morning light. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. "Everything. Nothing. How much I love you." He pulled her close and they lay there in comfortable silence. Outside, birds were beginning their morning songs. The house was quiet and peaceful. "I had a good life," he said softly. "Even with everything that happened, maybe especially because of everything that happened, it made me appreciate every moment." "We're not done yet," Felicity said. "We have plenty of good life left, I know, but I wanted to say it anyway. I wanted you to know that even if I had known everything that would happen, the fire and the years of hiding and all the pain, I would do it all again. Because it led me here, to you, to this." She kissed him, tasting the truth of his words. "Me too, I'd wait again. I'd go through it all again. For this." They spent the day together doing simple things, making breakfast, working in the garden, calling their children and grandchildren, reading books side by side. It was an ordinary day made extraordinary by the presence of deep, abiding love. As the sun set that evening, they returned to their usual spot on the porch. Felicity wore the phoenix bracelet Ethan had given her all those years ago, now tarnished with age but still beautiful. He held her hand, their fingers intertwined like they had been countless times before. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Felicity asked. "When you showed up at my door, I said a lot of things. You said you were sorry, that you couldn't contact me because it wasn't safe, that you had thought about me every day. I remember. I want you to know something. I would have waited longer. If it had taken 10 years or 20 or 50, I would have waited. Because somehow, someway, I knew you were out there. I knew you would come back to me." Ethan brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "And I would have moved heaven and earth to get back to you. Distance, time, danger, nothing could have kept me away forever." They sat together as the stars emerged, one by one, painting the sky with light. The world continued around them, but in that moment, they existed in their own universe, built from years of love and sacrifice and unwavering devotion. This was the miracle. Not that Ethan had survived a fire that should have killed him. Not that he had outsmarted criminals and built a case that brought them to justice. Not even that he had found his way back after 5 years of being dead to the world. The real miracle was that Felicity had waited. That love had endured when everything else had fallen away. That two people had found each other in the chaos of life and held on with everything they had. Years would continue to pass. They would grow older, slower, their bodies betraying them in small ways. But their love remained constant, a steady flame that burned through every season of their life together. They had been tested by fire and absence and fear, and they had emerged stronger for it. In the end, their story was not about a CEO who returned from the dead, though that was certainly remarkable. It was about a woman who refused to give up hope, even when everyone told her to. It was about a man who survived the impossible because he had someone worth surviving for. It was about love that transcended logic and reason and every obstacle placed in its path. It was about two people who chose each other, again and again, in 1,000 small moments and a few life-altering ones, who built a life of meaning and joy and purpose from the ashes of tragedy, who proved that some bonds cannot be broken, not by distance or time or even death itself. They had their happily ever after, not because life was perfect or because they never faced hardships again, but because they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. On quiet evenings, when the house was still and the world seemed to hold its breath, Ethan would look at Felicity and marvel at the journey they had taken. From a chance meeting in a conference room to a love that survived the impossible. From CEO and assistant to partners in every sense of the word. From two separate people to a unit so intertwined that neither could imagine existing without the other. And Felicity would look back at him with eyes that still sparkled with the same love she had felt decades ago, and she would think about that midnight knock on her door. The moment her world had turned upside down and right side up all at once. The instant when hope had been vindicated and faith had been rewarded. They had their forever. Hard-won and precious and more beautiful for everything they had endured to achieve it. A forever built on trust and devotion and the unshakable certainty that they were meant to be together. The phoenix had risen from the ashes, and in doing so, it had proven that love, true love, can survive anything. Even death. Even 5 years of silence. Even the darkest moments when all seems lost. Their story would be told for years to come. In business schools as an example of corporate ethics. In news articles as a tale of survival and justice. In family gatherings as the romantic story of how grandma and grandpa found their way back to each other against impossible odds. But for Ethan and Felicity, it was simply their life. Extraordinary and ordinary all at once. A love story for the ages and a quiet Tuesday evening. Everything they had dreamed of and more than they had dared to hope for, they had made it. Together. Always together. And as they sat on their porch, watching the world turn and the stars shine, they knew with absolute certainty that they would continue making it day by day, moment by moment, for all the days they had left. This was the happy ending. This was the promise fulfilled. This was love triumphant. This was home,